Chapter 11. "We must run," screamed Aegeon. Carmenta felt terror, and it was not all her own. Aegeon was crying in her soul, his terror bleeding through the mind impulse link. Her engine's flames fluttered and misfired. Stars and darkness blurred in the sensors that were her eyes. "Don't let me go," she moaned. "Please don't let me go." The Titan child's engines spluttered and died. It streaked forwards on its momentum, the station looming closer by the second. "Hold on to me," she pleaded. "Something is coming for us all. Do not let me go." In her cable cradle, her body went into convulsions. She retched oil and blood through the mouth slot in her lacquered mask. She was drifting, her mind unanchored. Voices whispered in her ears, telling her of things she had forgotten, of the darkness of a labor hab, of the broken turning of a fan, and the chopped light falling across the body of a man curled on a soiled pallet. He twitched and gave a hacking breath. His eyes opened. She had thought he was looking at her, but he would never see her again. The air had reeked of urine, mold, and rust. She had forgotten that. How could she forget that? It was not a memory. It was the present. She was not the Titan child. She was not Carmenta. She was nothing but a girl staring at her father's face and watching his blood-pink spittle dribble down his cheek. She could see the cogged tattoos of service under the runnels of spit. The memory vanished. "I am losing control," she thought. "It's here," shouted Aegeon over the link. She could almost see him twisting in his amniotic tank, defecating and bleeding in panic. "It is here. We must run. Run! No, we must run," he shouted. And as he shouted, his voice carried the vision of his fear into her mind. She saw what he had seen. It was like seeing a reflection caught in rippling water, all form and pattern breaking as soon as it was seen. She could see beyond the gray lines of the station, behind the stars. Shapes moved there, huge and protean. Scales and scabs of color clung to their bulk. They waited, their hunger barely restrained. Carmenta shrieked as a machine. Throughout the Titan child, power conduits ruptured, spilling gas and burning fuel into her insides. The plasma reactors faded and surged. She felt her own body twist in the cradle of cables. Her engines were still burning, but she was numb to them. She was losing her grip on her Titan child. Her hull was shaking, trembling like skin exposed to an icy wind. Aegeon's terror was flooding her with human fear, and the ship was trying to shake her free. She had to cut the interface with Aegeon, or he would destroy them. She forced her mind back into the link. Her mind became the Titan child again, ramming through her systems, trailing code damage and corrupt routines. She grasped the mind impulse link, and, in that instant, she saw him. He floated in his amniotic tank, churning it to froth with his vestigial limbs. Ribbons of fresh blood stained the fluid. Feet and waist tubes had ripped from the sockets in his mouth and back. His head seemed grotesquely large atop his shrunken torso. His eyes milk-white with blindness, his mouth stapled shut. The open eye on his forehead twitched wildly at the view beyond the crystal walls of the chamber. "Please," he said. She shut down the link, and the vision of the navigator's chamber vanished. The slow beats of her plasma-filled heart pulsed through her as she hung silent in the void. Then the Titan child's engines roared to life. Fire ran through her veins, and she wanted to run and not look back, but she turned towards the dead station. "Ahriman!" she shouted in an electronic cry. Ahriman did not run. The chamber's stone walls and pillared tiers were melting. In front of him, the demon arched its back and vomited a great wash of black liquid into the air. The sword impaling the demon began to glow with heat. Astrios staggered backwards, his palms smoking. The demon quivered, scattering burning droplets of blood as its body dissolved into a boneless pool of flesh. More demons stepped from shadows like congealing smoke. Bodies of wasted muscle and cracked skin clawed out of the gloom. Ahriman glimpsed white eyes, claws, and rows of hooked teeth and mucus-thick jaws. Exhaustion bubbled up inside Ahriman. Black circles popped at the edge of his eyes. Hoots and chitters scratched at his thoughts. He felt as if he were falling down a lightless shaft. He took a step backwards. His muscles ached as if he had been fighting for weeks without rest. A demon stepped from the growing throng. It had a long vulpine head, and its skin was taut over a hunched body of lean muscle. It took a slow step, its black eyes flicking over Astrios and Ahriman. Ahriman saw its legs tense. The demon jumped. Behind it, the rest of its kin came forwards in a single wave. Astrios began to turn to face the leaping demon, but too slowly. The demon's claws touched his shoulder guard just before it was about to land. "Down!" shouted Ahriman. Astrios dived to the floor. The telekinetic wave hit the demon while it was still in midair and flung it back in a spray of black slime. The charging demons faltered, and Ahriman ran forwards and pulled Astrios to his feet in the instant before they rallied and came on again. Bright light danced in front of his eyes, and his skin felt clammy. The circle of demons closed over them before they could take a step. Ahriman heard claws scrabble at his armor. Teeth and eyes filled his vision. Rancid breath fogged his eyepieces. He felt something sharp slip through a joint in his leg armor. Armor integrity warnings lit in his helmet display. "Astrios," he called, and reached for the librarian's mind. He felt Astrios' mind resist for an instant and then open. Their wills became one, and Ahriman felt his fatigue fall away. He formed a single blunt thought and heard its echo in Astrios' mind. The dome of force exploded outwards. Demons ripped from the floor and tumbled through the air. Fragments of pottery, metal, and bone rose in a scattered cloud. A moment of perfect, still calm flowed through Ahriman. He could feel every mote of dust and scrap of debris caught on the edge of the expanding telekinetic sphere. He changed the shape of his thought, and Astrios followed. The debris exploded outwards in a wave of shrapnel. The demons caught in the blast fell in shredded heaps. The way was open to the door out of the chamber. The calm had vanished from Ahriman as suddenly as it had come. He felt Astrios' mind buckle. Voids opened in his own will. They ran for the door. The demons followed, pouring into the passage opening like a swarm of insects. Frost ran down the walls in front of them. Cracks opened in the plated metal, glowing with a blue light. Ahriman tumbled end over end, his mag grip on the floor broken. He reached out blindly, felt his hand hit something solid, and grabbed on. His body spun around his grip and slammed into a hard surface. Force jutted through him, and the air left his lungs. He could not tell if he was holding onto the wall, ceiling, or floor. Confused runes swam across his eyes. He twisted around, trying to find the direction in which they had been running. Silence filled his skull. He could feel blood hammering in his ears. Something hit his arm, and he twisted to bring his sword around. Astrios' eyepieces were inches away from Ahriman's faceplate. The librarian had clamped onto the passage wall. "Which way?" said Ahriman, but Astrios was reaching past him, pointing. No, realized Ahriman, not pointing, aiming. The bolt pistol fired. A jet of silent flame spat over Ahriman's shoulder. Ahriman spun around, still holding himself in place with his right hand. The bolt round's detonation lit the darkness for a second. A living wall of mouths and reaching claws filled the passage behind them. Ahriman pulled his sword around and closed his eyes. He burrowed deep into his being, calling on reserves of focus he had kept sealed for so long he had almost forgotten them. "Burn," he sent, and the fire leapt from the blade tip. It shone blue with heat. Ahriman's mind went with the fire, riding its fury and guiding its path. It struck a demon with a halo of waving arms and burned straight through it. He swept the fire around, cutting through the demons in a brilliant arc. Some of the demons split into two smaller bodies, which floated for a second in the death slime of their parent before swimming forwards. Others burst apart in explosions of multicolored steam. Ahriman was shivering, his skin clammy and wet with sweat inside his armor. The formulaic patterns in his mind were burning, tainting his senses. He could smell smoke and feel heat prickle his lungs. Somewhere beside him, Astrios had stopped firing. They had to move. He released his hold on the flame. It did not end. The fire still coursed from his sword tip, ripping through his mind and body. He could not stop it. He could not release the power he had called. In his mind the burning pattern glowed brighter and brighter, becoming more complex, sucking in thoughts and sensations like a hurricane wind. The hand holding the sword began to glow. Pain lanced from his fingers, but he could not open them. He could do nothing but watch as fire boiled out of the cracks of his soul. His skin blistered. There was just fire, roaring in his mind. He could not stop. He could not remember how it had begun. "I am Azek Ahriman," came a voice from the depths of his mind. It was an old voice, forgotten and rejected. "No," he screamed in a thought that was charring to nothing. "No, I am not. He failed. The dream failed, and I fell." The power vanished, soaking back into his mind. He opened his eyes. The lance of heat still lingered as a smear of neon light hanging in the vacuum, cooling and fading from blue to purple. The distant door to the coral chamber was still visible, edged by a pulsing blood-red glow. Globules of slime and skin spun in the half-darkness. As he watched, pink amorphous shapes began to form from the vaporized slime. He could see sucker-tipped fingers flexing as they extruded from the congealing matter. Ahriman turned to look for Astrios. The librarian was already flying down the passage, kicking off walls, floor, and ceiling. Ahriman started to follow. A beam of actinic light fizzed past him and melted a hole in the passage wall. He turned as a demon hooted and flicked another beam of light from its fingers. The demon was crawling across the buckled floor grating. A wide mouth split the face in the center of its torso, a thick tongue slavering over teeth. Blue and yellow flames were licking its skin and lighting the hunger in its saucer eyes. Its 6 limbs moved with boneless speed as it scrambled closer. Ahriman spread his mind into the passage walls. Sweat instantly sheeted his skin, and then froze in hard droplets. His body floated to the center of the passage, cradled in a telekinetic web. Pressure built like a tightening bowstring. The metal of the walls began to buckle. He felt as if the noon sun were blazing in his skull. In front of him, Astrios was spinning as he shoved away from the roof. He folded his mind around the librarian. Astrios resisted, shoving back with a panicked wave of will. Ahriman felt the pain in his hand increase. "Submit!" screamed Ahriman, and felt the resistance drop away. He released the force of his mind as a demon reached for him with a flame-wreathed hand. Ahriman and Astrios shot forwards like arrows loosed from a bow. The tunnel ripped apart in their wake. The star of pain in Ahriman's head exploded. Shreds of metal scattered before them, half melting or dissolving into gray dust as they flew into the waiting dark. The Titan child rolled and skidded as Carmenta felt thrusters fire too hard. Opposing forces shook through her bones, and she screamed in pain. Coolant was venting into her holds, oil spraying from ruptured pipes, her corridors filling with acidic gas and steam. Bulkheads snapped shut, and she felt parts of the ship go numb. The Titan child kept skidding. The iron cliff of the station's flank loomed out of the static of her sensors, so close she felt she could touch it. Then her sensors cut out and plunged her into blindness. "No, no, no," she thought. "No, not like this. Not blind." She was alone and could feel nothing. "No, not like this. I am not flesh. Only flesh dies. I am metal. I am data and machine. I am Titan child." Her machine eyes opened again as data punched back into her mind. She was in time to see something pull itself from the station. 100-meter wide sheet of metal cracked from the station's back and lifted up like the carapace of a vast turtle rising from mud. Tendrils of lurid energy trailed from it as it emerged. Under its shell, the creature had limbs of wreckage, pincers of twisted metal, and fins of torn steel. A blunt head formed from twisted gun turrets turned and looked at the Titan child. Its eyes were gouged holes that wept molten metal. Carmenta looked back at it and felt the promise of ruin in the creature's gaze. The creature roared, an impossible sound that rang across the void. Carmenta fired. Plasma batteries and turbo lasers lit the narrow gulf between her and the station. The creature leapt. Debris spun behind it, sparkling like snowfall under starlight. Wings of crumpled metal unfolded from under its shell. Carmenta could not process what was happening. She had missed. The creature was accelerating towards her. No, it was flying in the airless void. The buzzing beat of its wings flooded her sensors. She readied to fire again, feeling the thrum of charging capacitors in vibration as breaches closed on macro shells. With a shower of void-pitted metal, another creature broke through the back of the station and leapt into the void. Then another, and another. Carmenta fired. The creatures vanished as plasma-tipped shells exploded in a spread of overlapping fire spheres. The release of each shot was hot, filled with a scream of molten fury. The creatures came through the inferno, red with heat, mouths wide. Carmenta felt cold, the cold of dead iron spinning through an endless night. She fired once more before the wave of burning creatures passed through her shields and sank their claws into her hull. Ahriman's mind buckled as his thoughts slurred. They were tumbling now rather than flying through the station, banging off walls, floors, and ceilings. Ahriman's helmet display cut out, returned and cut out again. He could hear air hissing from rents in his armor. He had no idea how much further they had to go, or even if he had guided them back the way they had come. The frame of an open blast door slammed into his helm. Sparks ignited behind his eyes. Part of his awareness fell away, as a portion of his brain blacked out. He hurtled on, unguided, momentum spinning him on as his telekinetic projection died. Astrios caught him, grabbing him as he tumbled past. The librarian had climbed his boots to a wall and reached out to hook Ahriman's arm. He tried to speak, but his teeth were loose in his mouth, and his tongue was thick with blood. A sickly luminous haze crept across his vision. "Which way?" said Astrios. Ahriman tried to answer, then shook his head. Astrios pulled him closer, his face looming in Ahriman's blurred vision. "Which way should we take?" said Astrios again. Ahriman tried to understand what the librarian meant. "They are coming." Ahriman turned his head and tried to focus through the fog of color and popping stars of light. 3 doorways looked back at him, 3 blank openings leading to darkness. They had come this way, of course. Or had they? His thoughts flowed like treacle. He could not remember, and he could not have been sure which door led to the gunship, even if he had. Astrios was shaking him harder and harder. He moved his hand to push him away, but his movement was sluggish and weak. He tried to grip Astrios' shoulder. The ceramite was vibrating as he touched it. Ahriman stopped moving back down the passage they had flown down. The walls were shaking as if in rhythm to a rising tide. "Which one?" "I don't know," said Ahriman. The end of the passage glowed as walls bent and flexed like the inside of an arching snake. Astrios let go of Ahriman and raised his bolt pistol. Light spilled forwards, clawed and horned shadows reaching down the walls. Ahriman found he still had his sword in his hand. He tried to raise the blade, but the movement made him roll in the zero gravity. A stuttering streak of flame sprang from behind them. The demons vanished behind a wall of phosphor-bright detonations. Ahriman turned. Another burst of flame split the passage. A figure in armor the color of dull copper was advancing from behind them, firing as he moved, his feet locking to the floor with each step. The Vox spat to life in Ahriman's ear. "Take the central door. 100 meters, then left turn 50 meters. Thaddeus' voice was emotionless, but Ahriman could taste the focus in the warrior's mind. "Where is Caden?" shouted Astrios. Thaddeus gave the smallest twitch of his head in reply, took a step towards the demons, and fired a broad burst. Ahriman could see that the fire pattern was taking all the warrior's focus. "I do not know," said Thaddeus. The last round caught from Thaddeus' bolter. He stepped forwards, pulled the clip from the weapon, loaded, and fired again in the space of a breath. The passage in front of him was ablaze, phosphax and oxygen gel burning white-hot on the walls and floor. Beyond the glare, Ahriman could see the demons recoil like wolves on the edge of torchlight. Last contact was before the station. Words failed Thaddeus, but he needed to say nothing more. Ahriman looked towards the central of the 3 doorways, and then back to Astrios. "Go," said Thaddeus. "I will hold." For how long, thought Ahriman, but he kicked off towards the central doorway. "Go," said Thaddeus again, and Ahriman glanced back. Astrios had not moved from beside his brother. "Go, brother." "We stand as one," growled Astrios. Pale lightning was playing around his fists, and Ahriman could feel the librarian trying to draw power from the warp. "No," said Thaddeus. "You always were bad at judging character." He was firing in short, controlled bursts, stepping forwards to change the angle of his shots. With every explosive splash of fire, the demons were closer, their bodies flickering between impressions of limbs, eyes, hands, and teeth. Thaddeus turned his head for a second to look at Astrios. "You will go, and I will stand alone. It is my choice." The librarian was silent for a second, then kicked off in a leaping bound towards the door. Ahriman crossed the threshold just in front of him. They scrambled towards the waiting dark, while behind them, muzzle flashes strode on. Half blind with fatigue, they moved with heedless speed, spiraling and crashing, until they spilled from the door into the cavern and saw the gunship waiting. The muzzles of the wing-mounted heavy bolters glowed dark red. Something had already come for the gunship. Globular flesh, scraps of metal, and spent cases formed an expanding cloud. Ahriman pushed off from the doorframe. The cooling mouths of the guns swiveled to face him. Sensor discs sent identification signals, and his battered armor answered. The guns went still. Unable to slow or steer his flight, Ahriman hit the craft's blunt wing with a bone-jarring clang. He grasped for the wing before he spun into the vast darkness of the cavern. Astrios hit the tail fin an instant later and almost lost his grip. Slowly, Ahriman pulled himself down the wing. The ramp was still open, and dim red light diluted the gloom of the crew compartment. Ahriman had begun to climb the ramp when he saw the figure waiting within. Phidias stopped firing. His clip was empty. Light filled the passage in front of him, the bright white of phosphex dancing in the blackness of the demon's eyes. He let go of the bolter, and his last touch sent it gliding into the narrowing space between him and his foe. He drew his knife and pistol. The demons came on without pause. Red target runes spread across his eyes as he aimed the bolt pistol. He began to fire, switching from target to target without thinking. Demons fell. Bodies burst like bloated sacks of skin. A smell of rotting meat and spice filled his mouth and nose. He pushed the sensation away and kept firing. The round counter ticked towards 0 in the corner of his eye. The bolt pistol went silent. The demons were 10 paces away, their flesh quivering as they swung and flew closer. He began to run towards them. His knife was a reassuring weight in his hand, like a memory held close. He had broken his oaths to the Imperium. Others, now long dead, had disputed that fact, but Phidias had always known the truth in his soul. They were falling and would fall further. Better they ended now, as a warrior who could still remember what honor was. A demon broke away from the swarm and spiraled towards Phidias. Long arms waved around its stump of a body, and hundreds of tiny mouths covered its bloody pink flesh. Phidias took another stride, dropped low, and rammed his knife upwards. Black liquid drooled out in weightless cords as he sawed up through the deflating bag of the demon's corpse. Something was scrabbling at his legs with long talons. He kicked blindly, felt the impact, and kicked again. Something he could not see stabbed into his left ribs. Alarms began to ring in his ears. Acid was spreading down the inside of his armor. He cut at a creature with a wide mouth and rolling eyes. The blows split it in two. The alarms were a constant whine in his ears. He took a breath, felt liquid rise in his throat. He raised his knife and cut again, before a hooked talon darted out and spilled his guts into the cold vacuum. Ahriman went still. The figure was half sprawled against a flight bench. Red crystals of blood hung around its crumpled form. It wore armor, its pitted bronze surface gleaming dully in the dim light. Even half hidden by shadow, it was clear that its body was not whole. Its arms and legs were bloody stumps. Something had ripped chunks from its chest. He could see white ribs poking from the sides of its wounds. Ahriman stepped forwards. He began to reach out with his senses to feel for the pulse of life in the slumped figure. As soon as he tried, his mind filled with a chorus of cries and a heat-haze sickness. Astrios swung down into the hold, not seeing the figure. "Come on," he said. Ahriman made a reply, but a voice stopped him. "Brother," said the voice, scraping across the vox. The figure on the floor moved, turning its head with drunken slowness. It still wore its helm, but the eyelenses were black and unlit. Astrios had frozen where he was. "Is that you, Astrios?" It was Caden, the warrior's voice a crunching slur of clotting blood. Caden tried to move, but what he achieved was a pitiful twitching. "Brother, I cannot see," said Caden, a wet breath between each word. Astrios took 2 strides and bent down. "It is I," said Astrios. "We have you, brother. You will be well." Caden coughed, and Ahriman heard the scraping of bones in the sound. "Liar," said Caden. "Where is Phidias?" Astrios said nothing, and after a second, Caden nodded weakly. "We have to go now," growled Astrios. As if in echo to the words, the gunship's weapons began to fire. Ahriman felt the craft's frame shake with recoil. Beyond the open hatch, strobing muzzle flashes broke the blackness. He moved towards the front of the crew compartment, clicking the vox to transmit as he did. "Take off!" He had no idea if the pilot servitor was still alive or if its mind was still functioning, but he shouted the command anyway. "Take off now!" A blurt of machine code answered him. A second later, the gunship's internal gravity activated, and the ramp began to close. Through the narrowing gap, Ahriman glimpsed the demons, floating and bobbing towards them, caught in the flare light of the firing guns. The gunship rocked as it unclamped from the platform. Air vented into the crew compartment in a cold fog. The guns were still firing, and the gunship shivered as its engines lit. Ahriman grabbed hold of an overhead rail. The gunship shot across the cavern, accelerating on bright cones of fire. Behind it, the demons ran across the platform and leapt into the void after it. Bolts of corpse light and arcs of crackling power followed the gunship. Some hit, burrowing into metal, chewing into circuits and fuel lines. The heavy bolter mounts on the wings swiveled and fired. Within the crew compartment, Ahriman tried to reach for a point of serenity amidst his fatigue. Caden's wounds were thawing, oozing blood onto the decking. Astrios was muttering something to the dying warrior, one hand supporting the back of Caden's helmet. Something hit the gunship, sending sparks crawling across the inside of the hull. The stink of burning cables and hot metal filled the compartment. Ahriman pulled his thoughts away from the scene in front of him and pushed his mind into the void beyond the hull. A thought the shape of ice and crystal formed in his mind, hardening over the gunship like a shell. Another bolt of lightning cracked across the gunship's wing, and Ahriman felt his mental ward hold for a second and then break. He gasped and blinked away blood-thick tears. "Astrios," he sent. The librarian's head snapped around. Ahriman could feel the rage fuming off him in hot waves. "I need your help." Astrios said nothing, but reached up and pulled his helm off. His skin was pale, and burn marks blistered his brow. He stared back at Ahriman, his true eye a pale orb with a pinprick of black beside the electric green of his augmetic. "We will all die here if you do not help me," Ahriman sent. Astrios looked back to the chewed remains of his brother. Fresh blood was seeping from the wounds. "We will die here, and any chance Caden may have will die with us." Outside the hull, the heavy bolters fired their last shells. As if sensing the weakness, the demons spilled forwards. The gunship jinked and flipped, weaving amongst blasts of rainbow energy. Invisible blows ripped at its wings, sending it spinning. Ahriman heard the craft's frame scream like a ripped girder. There was no time. He turned to look back at Astrios. "Now!" he sent, and layered the command with all he had learned of the librarian. Astrios was a man with many names, the name granted to him by his chapter, the name he had been born with and forgotten, the name that his mentor had called him, and the number the black ships had given him when they took him from his birth world. The command held all of these names, and it hit him like a physical blow. Astrios half fell and came up fast, his face twisted with pain and rage. Ahriman remained still. Astrios stopped, his hands clenched in fists. The gunship bucked again. Astrios opened his mouth, but never said what he was intending. Caden rose from the deck, floating into the air like a crack of bones that sounded like pistol shots. Frost spread across the walls and deck. In Caden's deep wounds, blood ice was forming. His head came up last. Black eyepieces looked at Ahriman. Ahriman felt cold. In his mind, the distant cries of the demons suddenly sounded like laughter. He had misunderstood. He remembered the gunship's weapons glowing red as he had approached it. He saw Caden's wounds and remembered the blood and meat hanging in the airless dark. The demons were not chasing them. They were circling. "I cannot see," said Caden's choking voice. The Titan child was burning across half her hull. Carmenta knew it, but could not feel it any more. Her void shields were gone. Scabs of molten slag had peeled off across her flanks and prow. The creatures crawled all over her, chewing and ripping at armor plates softened by the heat of their breath. She was half blind, but she could see the gunship, spinning in a clear sphere of space a few hundred meters away. It was so close, but it was tumbling like a broken bird. In one of her still functioning landing bays, a slab-sided lifter rose from the deck. Its servitor crew blurted in acknowledgement of her order. Blast doors unfolded, and the lifter pushed into the void. Caden floated towards Ahriman. Steam was rising from him, even as frost thickened across his armor. Shreds of skin hung from the stumps of his legs. Caden's wounds closed before Ahriman's eyes, fresh flesh filling the chewed gaps. Astrios lunged towards Caden. Caden's head twitched, and a telekinetic wave slammed Astrios into the wall. He rolled with the impact and sprang forwards. Caden drifted to the side and struck him across the chest with a lash of energy. Ahriman heard a dry crack of splintering ceramite. Astrios folded in before he could hit the floor. The demon's power smashed him across the compartment. He lay still, blood seeping from the cracks in his armor. Caden looked back to Ahriman. "No," thought Ahriman, "it is not Caden. Not anymore. He could see it now, the demon rooted in Caden's flesh like a parasite, snaking through his blood and bone like horned chains. There was nowhere to move. He tried to summon power, but it slipped out of his grasp like a rope tugged away by the wind. The demon gave a sorrowful cackle in his head. He could not move. He felt invisible hands grip his flesh, holding him in place. The demon raised Caden's arm. A long talon of frozen blood extended from the chewed stump. Delicately, almost gently, the demon placed the tip on the lens above Ahriman's left eye. The demon pushed the talon forwards. The crystal of the eye lens splintered. Ice blue light flooded Ahriman's left eye. He could not look away as the needle tip extended towards his pupil. "Caden," said Ahriman, and felt the last inch of his strength shorten. The talon tip halted. The demon roared with rage, the sound ripping from Caden's blood-clogged lungs. "Caden, I bind your flesh. I compel you by your blood." The demons staggered, and around them the stricken gunship spun and spun. Ahriman's will flowed into Caden's body. It was not fully the demon's, not yet. The demon had taken Caden as a host, but it had done so by blunt force. There was still the fragment of Caden's mind and body it had yet to conquer. Into that shrinking gap, Ahriman poured the last of his will. He did it without subtlety, ramming his raw strength against the demon. He felt the scraps of Caden's soul lend him strength. The demon vomited, and the neck seal of Caden's armor burst as red-streaked bile spilled down his chest. The stolen body twitched, striking the walls of the compartment. Ahriman felt his knees buckle. His own body felt like a distant memory. The demon's hold on Caden's flesh weakened, then began to slip. The demon's back arched. Caden's body was glowing like an overheating furnace. Ice melted from him, turning to steam before it could hit the floor. Then he felt another presence pour into Caden's body. It was cold and black, like water gathered from a deep cave. The demon that had been fighting for Caden's flesh vanished beneath the oncoming tide. Ahriman felt the edge of the new presence touch his own mind. It was like being stabbed by needles of ice, and the shock snapped him back into his body. Above him, the new creature shivered with Caden's flesh and stepped forwards. Caden's features vanished as his body moved, as if he had fallen into shadow. For a second, he looked like a hole cut in the background of the world. The newcomer reached down and lifted Ahriman from the floor, cradling his head in Caden's hands. He could feel the creature's eyes looking at him, into him. He looked back. "No, not you," croaked Ahriman. "It cannot be you." "Forget," said the shadow. Ahriman blinked. He saw billowing clouds of light that spiraled to a vanishing point. His body was cold. His mind was numb. He could not think. Somewhere beyond the border of his senses he was bleeding. The world was silent. He was not sure if he was still breathing. He could not remember where he was. Warm darkness crept over him. He saw nothing.